Kubor ka Batesi TV. Lawan Rashapi da ka Orange Nissan Loom Sopo near Fire Brigade Shillong. Ringkat bat ka net foodish. Ordar mapi. Minwan ra mangi hakerdog ying jongpi.
Unong ilam kaliang persya Dr. Mukul sang maha ka kakandai terik ubanai jembang arajar arpuway ulaong ba ka Jingpang jeri ka sorkar ya ka Jingpyrkhing tang haki Kyntoit kanam Ïarap than ban Tehlakam ya ka Jingsapriang coronavirus ne COVID-19. Ka kakandai terik ubanai jembang arajar arpuway Dr. Mukul sang maha uli asyim bentah ka jingilang balakot daw lampang ka ying dorbat thawaan ban yemir jimut na bentah ban Tehlakam ya ka Jingsapriang stat uniu kenyang Jingpang haka jela. Katkum kajing ajing mujong Dr. Mukul sangma habaya kunya katma kadon kam ban shim kia nado badang sedang bat ka sorkar kam day ban shim da komway pat ne ban pet khamat ba ki kadokti habadon kijing ajing mut ban yakun yakane ka Jingpang. Ulong shushu ba ka Jingkhang dam ka day shibenta ka lat ban pensange ya ka Jingpur jong uniu kenyang Jingpang henry ka ba kamkong san kalong kumno ban Tehlakam bat ka sorkar kam day ban shupen serwaka yi ka por henry ka day ban shimmi kilat kilenti ki bapaka ban pelat ya ki basyakta na ka tersim jong ka jingyap na ka jingsya selat hau ni uknyang Jingpang ubam la setia ban yoi.
There has to be a mechanism put in place, and how this mechanism has to be put in place will have to be properly examined from the realistic perspective, scientific perspective, whether it can be appropriately implemented with the sole intention of containing the virus from further spreading. Now, look, we have quite a substantial number of infrastructures. We have created lots of multi-facility center. Then we also have lots of school buildings which were built with that human capital development program, and quite a number of hostels which are completed and still not used. So let them find out those infrastructure which are completed, which are almost in the verge of completion, and prepare them to utilize them as an infrastructure where all the necessary interventions can be put in place. So there will be multiple interventions. No, none of the measures in isolation is going to work. When we are fighting against a pandemic of this nature, you will have to have multi-pronged approach, a very comprehensive multi-pronged approach. That's why the complete planning strategy, like when you are going to a war, when you know that there is an impending war, you'll be compelled to go to the war. Then there are innumerable things which one has to do, starting from minute details of informations pertaining to the enemy, to determine their strength, weaknesses, likelihood of the fallout of any conflict, and auditing one's own resources, arsenal, and preparedness. Are we prepared? What are the likely challenges? What are the likely unforeseen elements of surprises? Those are things. So this is something like that, So no measure in isolation will suffice. You have to be really, really frank. That's why I have, if you remember, immediately after the initial lockdown, when the first wave started in the country, I have shared about what we have learned from the past, what we have learned from the past pandemics, and how we can leverage upon those knowledge which we have, and based on that, how we are placed now. What are the bigger challenges as you compare with the past and now? You have a bigger challenges of population density, the mobility of the people, then the overall movement of the people, which is based on various activities which was limited in the preceding centuries. So all those things. And any pandemic, particularly when we are talking about a pandemic of this nature, of a highly infectious virus, from the scientific perspective, we are always advised that the virus is likely to mutate. Now, mutation of virus will also come with certain element of surprises, whether it becomes more lethal or whether it becomes less lethal. Those element of surprises will always be there. Therefore, as we are saying that when we are looking at an impending war, inevitable war, how we have to be prepared is how we have to be prepared. So, as I have said, stitch in time saves life. So everything has to be done on time. That's the reason why we try to urge upon the government that every concern expressed by citizens anybody, whether it's an elected member or members belonging to any civil society or any individual, as a concerned citizen, are trying to reach out to the government, draw the attention of the government, and articulating their concern, they must take cognizance. They must not land up saying, hey, okay, you're pointing fingers at us. It's a blame game. No, that is the wrong approach, because everybody must be taken on board and must be carried forward as a team, because this war is not a war which can be fought like a conventional war. It's a war against a virus, unknown, unseen enemy. So how the virus is going to behave after the mutation, and keeping in mind the likelihood of now first wave, second wave, third wave, fourth wave, how they are going to ultimately manifest itself as a disease. So all those things are important. Therefore, ramping up. Lockdown is one aspect of multi-pronged measures, and it is only to arrest the speed of transmission and gain more time. More time for what? More time to prepare. So we'll have to look at whether we are using those precious times to prepare, or whether we are wasting the time. Today what I see is that we have wasted time. We should therefore learn from this past, but these are very painful experience. When these experiences are associated with loss of precious life of our dear ones, we must be able to save every single life. But if we are not able to save lives, then you can understand the pain associated with loss of life. So therefore, as we move forward, our efforts should be to minimize the loss of life, to minimize the sufferings, to minimize the crippling effect on the society, on the individuals, on the families due to the pandemic. Because this pandemic is going to leave behind a trail of, miseries, sufferings, pain. Therefore, how to have the preventive measures when we are dealing with disaster? Because again, to have an understanding, the COVID-19 pandemic has been notified by Government of India as a national disaster. So if it is notified as a national disaster, then how are you going to be prepared to prevent the kind of damage due to an impending disaster? Prevent the loss of life, likely loss of assets, properties, like that, So there is a complete comprehensive disaster management plan. Those are available for the government to use as a source of informations to amplify their measures, which is required to be put in place. And that is exactly what we are telling them. Like, dealing with the disaster is not only dealing to mitigate when the disaster strikes, but the preparedness to ensure that when the disaster strikes, there is minimum damage, minimum loss of life. That is how we plan. Prevent those type of disaster which we can prevent, like fire accident. They can be prevented, but earthquake you cannot prevent. Cyclone you cannot prevent. These are not within the control of mankind. Comprehensive plan to minimize the likelihood damage in the inevitability of those kind of disasters. So that is precisely how our approach has to be, because the pandemic, the only thing is that I'm afraid probably people can presume that the pandemic is almost over, while the war is still on, declaring that you have emerged victorious. But the war is still on. That's where we must understand that war is still on. This wave, after this third wave, how fast the third wave is going to come, we have to prepare. We have to ensure that, we look at all the possibilities and therefore put all the comprehensive.